I'm gonna be totally honest with you guys. Like, really honest with you guys. This episode isn't terrible, considering that I've seen much worse episodes, even when they're Halloween or not, but this episode just isn't good, which is why this is one of the first videos to kickstart Halloween Mania. The last time I talked about Camp Lazlo was where was Lazlo that was part of my Summerpalooza 4 plans back in 2022, not this year's Summerpalooza that had Beach Paradise in the title. And I was thinking about looking at the positives, but considering I was burned out, and since that we reached to the Halloween season, I felt like I need to talk about this episode, knowing full well that its brother episode, Meat Man, had a better execution on the horror aspects, which in all honesty, since that episode isn't Halloween related, I felt like that the Halloween aspect in this just falls flat. Like, I'm sorry, but the comedy of this show just didn't stick well the more I think about this episode. Everyone in Camp Kidney, except Scoutmaster Lumpus, are leaving during Halloween, which leads to Scoutmaster Lumpus really excited that he's all alone with the candy that he has in his building, but also Lazlo, Raj, and Clam stayed because they actually enjoyed Halloween and they want to spend Halloween in the location that they're in. But at the same time, this also leads to them only staying at Camp Kidney during the holiday. When they go trick-or-treating to the first house, which is Scoutmaster Lumpus' house, they actually mistaken him as someone wearing a costume in Halloween. And to be perfectly honest, it was actually clever, but when Lazlo and the others leave, they went in an entire circle just to go back to Scoutmaster Lumpus' house, who they see as a different house. I'm sorry, but if the type of comedy in this show actually got you amused, that's good for you, but at the same time, I know people are gonna be mad when I say this, but SpongeBob did it better in SB 129 when SpongeBob and Patrick knocked on Squidward's door multiple times so that they can go jellyfishing with him even though he denies. I'm sorry, but the thing is the reason onto why that worked, even if I'm not a fan of SpongeBob like I used to, is that when Patrick said that he doesn't want to play with us, SpongeBob retorted, not really retorted, but replied that he just isn't ready. It may be something juvenile and way too insignificant, but in comparison to what Camp Lazlo is doing by doing the same ideal, it drags out way longer than it needed to be. And in the previous episode, while Scoutmaster Lumpus is just trying to find a comment, while Lazlo and the others are bothering him with them turning on so many lights, I can easily understand the motivations of the characters, since that Lazlo and his friends mistaken on the fact that the moon might be shining down because they assume that Lumpus's telescope is a gun, all the while the moon might be crashing towards Earth, which would cause a fire. So I can understand onto the motivations onto why they're doing that in that episode, but in this episode, when they witness Lumpus multiple times, even though it was somewhat clever on the fact that he was wearing different outfits, which I would accept it for what this episode is trying to do. However, when Lumpus gets into his pajamas, or rope in this case, they still don't see the difference completely that it's actually Scoutmaster Lumpus, and the fact that they're coming across a building of Scoutmaster Lumpus. You see, the reason onto why I do not like the SpongeBob and Squidward dynamic is because, at the very least, in the SpongeBob show, it kind of made sense. But in this, well, it's literally the characters going around in a huge circle and then coming back. It's not even clever because even if I somewhat found it amusing at a young age, the way SpongeBob handled it was a lot more better since it didn't drag out too long, and the misunderstanding, while insignificant, made a lot more sense in comparison to the countless misunderstandings that the Bean Scouts were doing in this episode. Now, I know that the campers leaving during Halloween, even though that the series is supposed to be taking place in the summer, is contradictory and unlogical. But since people have moved past that, since the logic in the show is sometimes non-existent, even though in my point of view it's mostly, the criticisms that I've seen is that if this show is going to have a Halloween episode, especially when this show was new by the time this episode came out, it shouldn't involve the campers, mainly the jelly beans, going in a huge circle, and then towards the end when they find the Halloween candy, they get sick, which is somewhat realistic, but I honestly felt like that the jelly beans would have go to different locations outside of Camp Kidney. Lazlo said earlier in the episode is that he and his friends should stay at Camp Kidney and trick-or-treat at Camp Kidney, sure, but also in Prickly Pines. And the fact that they just go back to Scoutmaster Lupus's house multiple times and mistaken him as a different person entirely, I'm sorry, but the fact that these characters never go anywhere in Prickly Pines other than Camp Kidney is really saying something that the only information that we get from this episode is that Scoutmaster Lumpus lives in Camp Kidney, which, in the position and attitude he is and at, it's accurate, but for me personally, there's no excuse. I'm sorry, but whenever I think about this episode, it's not humorous like it was. It actually got on my nerves. In comparison to the SpongeBob episodes, well, even though it also got on my nerves when I got older, at least I can understand an execution of it all, of the joke of what they're trying to do. But in this, the joke itself, it just feels really repetitive to the point that it's really becoming a lot more like SpongeBob Light rather than just being Camp Kidney or Camp Lazlo as its own show. There's a reason onto why people are addressing this being a SpongeBob knockoff, for the most. As for the final minutes of this episode, it's better than the middle of this episode, but at the same time, I didn't find it clever. I understand it's supposed to be a joke that when Lazlo and Yellows think that there's a stranger or a monster coming up in the front door and they hide themselves inside of a bear statue, and when Lumpus gets in, he sees the bear statue chasing him. It's better, like I said, but at the same time, I didn't find it amusing, especially the bit where the bear chases Scoutmaster Lumpus. Sorry, but I don't like that type of cartoon logic, and I'm actually thankful that nowadays cartoons don't do that anymore. And the ending, well, Lazlo and the others puke up candy out from the bear costume or statue. The episode ends with them saying that it's the best Halloween ever. I'm gonna be really honest with you, they would have had a better Halloween if they went to different houses rather than the same house over and over again. In the fact that the ending itself just isn't as just isn't as satisfying, knowing full well that the following episode, while not satisfying, in fact the complete opposite, had a better ending than this. Which I'm going to assume that they focus on the horror aspects in the following episode, while in this episode, they had little to work with. I understand that looking into positive aspects in this show aren't hard to find, but when it came to this episode, even if I do not hate it or find it that bad in comparison to other Lazlo episodes that I've seen, it doesn't change the fact that it's just more less than a Halloween episode, and mainly an episode involving the jelly beans just doing random stuff. Not really random stuff, but doing the same routine again. And towards the end, they try to do something different, but at the same time, it just wasn't enough to make this episode good, even though it was already too late. Even though that I could have reviewed Meat Man, since that I was originally going to do that, it's not like that I'm missing anything, and for me personally, I have to include plenty of Halloween reviews that centers around Halloween. Granted, there are other videos that aren't gonna be involving Halloween, but when it comes to horror aspects, it qualifies. I'm just saying, this is going to be a lot more complicated than before, considering that I'm focusing on this schedule or holiday just as the same as the summer season and Christmas. Believe me, this month is going to get better from here on out. I'm giving this episode a 5.5 out of 10.